I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual. 起立，面向佛堂，参加先鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位的传习鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。
So what is 77 all about? Let me go ahead and read it one time from beginning to end. The Tao of Heaven is like drawing a bow. Lower that which is high, raise that which is low, reduce that which has excess, add to that which is lacking. The Tao of Heaven reduces the excessive and adds to the lacking. The Tao of people is not so. It reduces the lacking in order to offer to the excessive. Who can offer their excess to the world? Only those who have the Tao. Therefore, sages act without conceit, achieve without claiming credit. They do not wish to display their virtue. All right, so time to analyze this chapter. First, from a structural perspective. So what are some of the repeating characters? Well, looking at the Chinese characters now, I'm going to point out two lines that match exactly. And that would be line 1 and line 7. As you can see, the three characters of line 1 here and the three characters of line 7 here are exactly the same. So I will mark them in red. So what's going on in this particular chapter is that it starts out talking about the Tao of Heaven, and then it reiterates in order to contrast the Tao of Heaven with the Tao of humanity, the Tao of people. And then it makes the point that oftentimes we are not following the Tao of Heaven. We're kind of going off in our own direction, contrary to the Tao. So then at the very bottom, in the third section, we now have seen many examples where a Tao Te Ching chapter can be divided up into three parts: the introductory part, the main part, and then the ending or the conclusion part. So in the final part, it's the conclusion about how we should be as Tao cultivators, emulating the great sages, emulating the Tao itself, without a whole lot of, by using the heavenly Tao, the natural Tao as an example, we would act as a balancing mechanism as well in our lives and in our dealing with other people. And we can do that without claiming credit. We can do that without trying to display our virtues. So let's backtrack a little bit. We're still analyzing the structure of this particular chapter. So what else can we discern about this? Well, if you take a look, the two red lines that I have here, they indicate the beginning of they indicate the beginning of sections 1 and 2 respectively. So from line 1 to line 6 will be one section, and then from 7 down there's another section, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Now, before we actually mark them as such, let me point out some additional characters that are also reiterating from line to line. So I'm marking them in a different way to try to make them stand out. So if you take a look at line 3 and 4, you're going to see a couple of characters that reiterate themselves. Same with 5 and 6 in a different position, but for all 4 lines, 3, 4, 5, and 6, the ending character is the same. And that is that's a commonality for all of them. It's also indicating for us a structure. So looking at this right now, line 1 is the beginning of the section, line 7 is the beginning of the section. With these similarities being marked, you can tell that 1 to 6 is section 1, and then from 7 on down is another section. So how do we mark the boundary between section 2 and 3, the main part and the concluding part? Well, what we can do is to take a look at what it is expressing. And you will see that in line 13, it is asking a question. So above line 13, so I've got a highlight here that marks the question. So above 13, from 7 down to 12, you're going to see basically the difference between the Tao of Heaven and the Tao of Humanity. So logically, that forms another section. Now let's focus on 1 and 2 before we handle 2 and 3. For 1 and 2, it's pretty clear. I think everyone can see that there should be a line between 6 and 7. So we'll go ahead and do that. We'll clean up all these markings that I've made on the page. There we go. So that's a little bit easier on the eyes. And then now we tackle the difference between the middle section and the ending section. So the last section is asking who can offer their access to the world? Well, only those who have the Tao. So this is getting into the conclusion that's telling us how to live, how we should live, how we should cultivate the Tao, and what that means in the context of this chapter. So again, we can clean this up a little bit. From 7 to 12 is one section, and from 13 on down is the final section. And you can tell that there is a couple of repeating lines with characters. So these are off in a different position, so they're a little bit hard to see. But once I mark them out like this, I think they're pretty obvious, as you can see. So let's go ahead and clean this up and put in a line. Nice and clean. So here we have the 3 different sections of 77. Now, having seen the structure, our next step is to analyze this chapter line by line. In some cases, character by character. Let's not waste any time. Let's dive right into it. Let's start with the first 2 lines. We start with the 3 characters, and these are 3 relatively simple characters. Let me decipher them for you. If you've been listening to this either podcast or YouTube recording, or just listening to me live, then you know that the 3 characters are relatively easy. The first one we have seen many times. It means the sky or heaven. And the last character there, the 3rd character, is simply the character for the Tao. And you can tell that it's the same character that we have here as we have in the upper right-hand corner. So with that, let me talk about the way it sounds. 天之道. So pinyin is like 天 Z Dao. The Z is actually not that close to the original Chinese, the Mandarin. 之. And that 之 doesn't really have an equivalent in English. It's a little tricky for a native English speaker to sound out correctly. Z, ZHI is probably the best we can do, the closest we can come to it. So 天之道. What does that mean? Let's go ahead and break it down character by character. So literally, the first character, as I mentioned, is heaven. 之, the second character, is apostrophe S. This is a common character in Mandarin in ancient times as well as modern times. And this is one of those characters where the meaning has not changed in the thousands of years that it's been used, because it is part of everyday speech. And then the last character there, Dao. So you'll notice that the pinyin is Dao with a D, and the English word is Dao but with a T, but still should be pronounced with the D sound, Dao. All right, so how do we translate that? Well, it's fairly easy. You already see the translation here, the Tao of Heaven. But if it's heaven apostrophe as Tao, then we also have the alternative of heaven's Tao. Heaven's Tao, the Tao of Heaven, same difference. Okay, so the alternative to talk about the Tao of Heaven is the heavenly Tao. And that, in Mandarin, we would simply take out the middle character. We would take out the zhi, and we would get Tian Dao, and that's commonly used. It's more frequently used than Tian Zhi Dao. So heavenly Tao is a more common expression than heaven's Tao. All right, so let's note one thing right now. This is important. Here, we can see an Eastern tendency to associate the Tao with heaven. It's really not such an odd notion, because notice that in the Western conception, especially in the religious sense, we usually tend to associate God with heaven or the sky. So oftentimes, people say the man upstairs or Heavenly Father above. These are all expressions linking the wide open skies to the heavenly realm, to that which is divine, that which is godly, Jesus, etc., Jehovah, and so on. However, I think a moment's thought would convince you that the concept of Tao and the concept of God have one thing in common, and that is omnipresence. That is to say, the Tao is everywhere, just like the God of Western conception is said to be everywhere. So what I like to talk about, when people say the man upstairs, I like to point out, not as much anymore because I just like to stay quiet, but when I was much more egotistical and much more noisy and like to talk about what I believe, I often say things like, well, the man upstairs is not really a man or a woman, because God is beyond the concept of male or female. So why do we even bother with the medieval depiction of this dude with white beard as God? Why can't it be a female? To me, it would be just as valid. In fact, God should be free to assume either male or female form. So let's not get too stuck on the expression, the man upstairs. It may be the woman upstairs. That's number one. Number two, why upstairs? Why can't God be here right now? In fact, if God is indeed everywhere, then God is upstairs and downstairs. God is in this room and in every other room. God is inside the house and outside the house. There's no place where God cannot be. So why upstairs? Why? That doesn't even make sense. So the expression, the man upstairs, reflects a rather limited and primitive understanding. That's what I used to say. Of course, I ended up offending everybody when I say that. Now, when I talk about the Tao, I talk about the same thing, that number one, well, right off the bat, the Tao is not a person, so there are no medieval Renaissance paintings showing the Tao, with the hands stretched out, with a very muscular build, reaching out to mankind. Thank goodness, because God is not a deity, God is not a person. So God doesn't have a gender associated with it. On the other hand, the similarity with the Western conception, the man upstairs, is that people often look above or even point above when they say the Tao. When they talk about the Tao, they like to associate it with heaven. But then I would say that, well, why heaven? Isn't the Tao everywhere? So the Tao isn't just heavenly, it is also earthly. In fact, when you talk about the protective, the natural Tao, the Tao has much more to do with the land on which we live than the sky. So think about what the earth does for us versus the heaven or the sky. So the earth nurtures humanity. It gives forth the abundance of fruits and plants to sustain us. It gives us shelter from the elements so that we're not exposed to the elements. And where do the elements come from? Well, the wind, the rain, the snow, they all come from the sky. They lash at us. It's not pleasant. It's sort of like punishment from the sky. So if I were to pick between the sky and the earth, I know that I would prefer the earth more so than the sky. So why heavenly Tao? So all of this is me trying to say that we can understand the stylistic expression, the man upstairs, the Heavenly Father, the Heavenly Tao, etc., but as thoughtful, considerate, articulate, advanced cultivators of the Tao, I want to make sure everyone walks away with the realization that the Tao is everywhere, not just up above. So Heavenly Tao is just an expression. It isn't literally true that the Tao is only in heaven and nowhere else. That can't possibly be true. So the Tao is everywhere we look, whether we look up or look down. All right, so let's move on from the Heavenly Tao. Here we have line 2. Let's talk about that. Line 2 says the Tao of Heaven is like drawing a bow. So the primary concept is that if you take a step back and think about all this, the idea is that this Tao that's very cosmic, that's universal, is reflected in everyday things, everyday activities that we do at the personal level, the micro level. And the bow and arrow is one example, but the Tao is also reflected in everything else as well. So what does it mean when I say that the macro is reflected in the micro, that the cosmic is reflected in the everyday and the personal level? Well, it means that, number one, when you understand the big ideas about the Tao, the Tao is formless, there's simplicity in the Tao, there's an order in the Tao, everything is organized, the Tao is one, oneness, complementary duality, all of these concepts, and the concepts from the previous chapter, the concept of softness being associated with life. Understanding the big ideas about the Tao can help us with every aspect of life. The reason is because the macro is reflected in the micro. The cosmic is reflected in the personal. So it behooves us, it's advantageous to us to understand the big ideas about the Tao. It doesn't just help us with a spiritual aspect of life. It helps us in pragmatic, practical, everyday reality. And it also means, number two, that the reverse is also true. And what I mean by that is that when you observe the little things in life, when you observe some aspect of life, whatever that is, and when you master a skill, a technique, something that you want to master in life, maybe language, maybe music, maybe art, maybe work, whatever that is, when you observe and master something, we can get closer to the Tao. It gives you insights. You can reflect from what you're doing at any moment and say that, well, if this is true in the here and now, then it must also be true in some aspect of the Tao. And I can apply it to other activities. If I'm working hard on a musical instrument and I gain mastery of it, then I can use that to generalize and extend into a greater concept that, practice makes perfect, And therefore, just like I have mastered a musical instrument, I can use the same effort and diligence to master anything else that I want to master in life. So it's a two-way street. The big to the small to the big. So for this particular case in this chapter, we're using archery to reflect on the Tao, and we're using the Tao to reflect on archery. So that's the idea in line 2. Okay, now I want to focus on the 3 middle characters in line 2. And first thing I want to do is to break them down and explain what they are, character by character. So first character is similar to or like. And the second character here, which is the third character in the line, the second character means to expand. And then the last character is the bow. So how would we translate this? It's similar to drawing a bow. And you can tell that in the translation that I hear, it's like drawing a bow, same thing. All right, so there's a couple of important things that this implies. Let's walk through them. So here I have a picture. This is a very modern bow and arrow, and here's a modern archer pulling open, expanding, drawing this particular bowstring that she has in her hand. So what can we say about that? Well, let's think about the similarity. When you pull back the bowstring, you accumulate the energy to make a shot. You know, the more you pull back, the more powerful it is when you release. I think that makes sense to everybody. You know, right away, when we look at the action of shooting an arrow, you automatically understand, yep, I am now accumulating energy to make a shot. So what does that mean? So because we're talking about the Tao, because the Tao applies to everything in life, I want everyone to have the flexibility, the agility of mind to be able to apply this to every aspect. So even activities that have nothing to do with the sport of archery, so think about what happens when you get ready to jump. What do you have to do? Well, you have to accumulate the energy to make a jump, which means you have to lower your body, you bend your legs, your muscles are getting ready to spring to propel you forward or upward or both. So that is also the process of accumulating energy to make action happen. And I think you see the similarity between that and pulling back on the bow, getting ready to make a shot. Now, with that same agility of mind, I want to invite you to extend further, make it even more general. I want to challenge you to apply that not just to jumping, not just to shooting an arrow, but to everything. Here's what I mean. Whenever you make plans or any preparations before an activity, whenever you get ready, and you can probably think of some examples right now, like, for instance, if you are a golfer, you are swinging back to tee off. If you are in the batting cage, you are pulling back on the bat to hit the ball that's coming at you, the baseball that's coming at you. So it doesn't have to be sports oriented. When you're getting ready to do something, you are accumulating the energy to do so. So keep that idea in mind. It'll come in handy in just a moment. Okay? So it's about making preparations before an activity. How do we apply that? Well, let's move on to the next line. Now we're on to line 3 and line 4. As you can see, we've got the translations here: lower that which is high, raise that which is low. So let's break them down, character by character. So when we take a look at line 3, 4 characters, literally the first character means high. Second character, very commonly used. It means that which is, that which does, he who is, they who are, they who do, etc. It's a character that can be used in that particular context to refer to something else. And then we have the character for lower, and then we have the last character there, which means it. So translation, when you translate this particular line, you cannot go in the sequence of the original Chinese because that would sound very odd in English. You have to switch it around a little bit to make it syntactically correct in English. So you will have to start with lower as the verb, lower that which is high. So it's like the reverse of the way that it's talked about in Chinese. Lower that which is high. Now, with this example, you can probably figure out how to do line 4. It's very similar. So line 4 is the complement or the opposite. So literally, low, that which is, raise it. That which is low, raise it, is what it's saying. So when you want to translate, you can switch it around in the same order that I did the previous line, and you will get raise that which is low. So that's how we figure out what the lines are trying to say. And you can also take a look at the act of shooting an arrow and figure out what it's expressing. It's describing the aiming process in archery. It's always done at an angle. What do I mean by that? Here's what I mean. When you are shooting a target at a distance, you're never aiming straight at it. You're always taking the distance and gravity into account. So you always have to raise to a certain angle so that when you shoot off, it describes an arc, not a straight line, but an arc. And if you raise it up too high, it's not going to work. If you're too low, your arrow will fall short of the target. So how well you adjust higher or lower, it partly determines your accuracy. Emphasis on the partly, because there are other factors involved. Even without anything else involved, you can tell that something like wind would affect the accuracy. Distance, certainly, we talked about that, and also the kind of arrow you're using, the kind of bow you're using, and so on. And then there's another factor which we're going to get to in just a moment. So easy to understand. This is talking about archery. So lower, higher, etc. That's something that we can grasp intuitively. So let me say that if you should be so unfortunate as to read a translation that is not really understanding the original, you would end up something like, if the bowstring is too short, then you lengthen it. If the bowstring is too long, then you shorten it. Okay, that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You're getting away from the topic. That's a really awful translation. And, it's considered polite among authors to respect one another and say that, well, maybe everybody's right. I can't do that, sorry. That's just, when you talk about bowstring, you're completely robbing the reader of the original essence of meaning. So I can't go along with that. Let's move on. So what's the other factor that determines accuracy? Well, that's coming right up. Let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, so let's take a look at lines 5 and 6. Reduce that which has excess, add to that which is lacking. Okay, so again, I got to emphasize, this doesn't mean that the bowstring is too long, you got to cut it off, and if the bowstring is too short, you have to add to it. That's completely wrong. What it does mean, well, let's take a look at the characters. We've got 5 characters in line 5. Literally, the first character means have. Second character means excess. And then we have the same character as before here, that which does. And then reduce it. So that which does have excess, that which has excess, reduce it. And that's misunderstood as the dimension or the length of the bowstring, as I mentioned. But it's not about that. It isn't about that, as you will see in just a moment. So the translation is reduce that which has excess. And then the other line, you can also figure out, just based on line 5, it's similar. So literally, the first character is not, second character is enough, and the third character is exactly the same. So that which does, depending on what's being said, and then add it. So you can look at it as that which is not enough, add to it. Or, translation, add to that which is insufficient, or add to that which is not enough. So what's it talking about? Well, the angle is the visible part of archery. You can tell just by, at a glance, what angle the archer is aiming to shoot. But it's not the whole story. What is another factor that affects the accuracy? Well, it's one that we cannot observe as easily as the angle of the shot. It's the strength that goes into drawing back the bowstring. The strength that you use has to be just right for you to hit the target accurately. If you're using too much strength, you're pulling it back too much, you're going to overshoot. The arc is going to arc right over the target. But if you're pulling it back just a little bit and it's not sufficient, then you're going to fall short of the target. It's going to make a small arc and land somewhere before the target. That's what it really means. Has nothing to do with the length of the string. So you got to pull back at just the right amount to have the shot be accurate. And all of these, the angle, the high angle, the low angle, the pulling back far enough or not too far, all of these has something to do with life itself. Let's keep going. Okay. Here in this picture, I'm depicting a couple of Mongolians. It's a traditional art. Archery is a traditional art for the Mongolians. It was the basis for the historical Mongolian conquest of the Mongolian Empire, which extended partway into Europe. So the kingdoms, the countries, the people of Eastern Europe had never seen anything like the Mongolian army, the Mongolian archers. They excelled and they were far above their enemies in terms of archery and also horsemanship. So in battle, the formation of the Mongolian army was that they would approach the enemy, and while still very far away, the front ranks would all pull back and let loose their arrows. And this was, the Mongolian bow and arrow was far harder to draw back, and all the soldiers were trained to pull it back with great strength. It also meant that their arrows had far greater range. So even before the Eastern European armies could strike at the invading Mongolian armies, they were getting all these arrows coming down at them. And then the front ranks of the Mongolian army would separate left and right, go to the back of the marching formation, while the second rank would come up and do the same thing, while the first rank that's traveling to the back is reloading the bow and arrow. They keep doing this rank after rank after rank. It's like a big, large version of a machine gun for armies. So this is what decimated all the defending armies in the way of the invading Mongolian horde. The term yellow peril came from that period in history because at that time, the Mongolian armies were almost unstoppable. So that tradition persisted until today. The Mongolians are very much into horsemanship and archery. They're like national sports. So now I want to talk about archery as a metaphor for life. How do we map everything that this chapter is talking about to living everyday reality? Well, here we go. First, hitting the target. What does that mean? That corresponds to us achieving a particular goal in life. Whatever that goal may be. Perhaps it is graduating out of college. Perhaps it's getting a specific particular promotion. Perhaps it's achieving the completion of a project. It could be anything. Hitting the target is achieving a goal in life. Maybe it's a fitness goal. Maybe you want to do a certain number of repetitions of a particular exercise. That's a goal. Maybe you want to become a better, more sociable person, be able to make more friends. That's a goal. Whatever that goal is, it's about hitting a target. So this chapter talks about aiming too high, aiming too low. This chapter talks about how the Tao of Heaven, if it's too high, then you need to lower it. If it's too low, you need to raise it. So let's talk about aiming too high. In the context of achieving a goal, having a target in life, to aim too high could mean having unrealistic goals. Goals that are really out of reach. So the ancient sages would not be the ones to say something like, shoot for the stars, land on the moon. They would actually say, no, create a plan that's realistic within your abilities to achieve, have steps that you want to follow to achieve that plan, execute that plan. So to have unrealistic goals could also be a manifestation of arrogance, that you have an unrealistic view of yourself. So in Chinese, an expression that is often used to describe someone who has unrealistic sights set too high and yet lacks the ability to achieve that particular vision, the Chinese expression is 眼高手低. So 4 characters. 眼 means eyes. 高 means high. So, it's like when we say, yeah, you got, that person has eyes on his forehead, he's looking down on everybody. 眼高, eyes too high, means that you are looking too high beyond your ability to accomplish something. So, hands, 低, 眼高手低, 手低 means hands low, means that your hands can't go as high as what your eyes can see. Your hands represent your abilities, and your abilities are not high enough to accomplish what you have set in your sight as your goal. So, 眼高手低, a very common expression in Chinese. Aiming too high, unrealistic goals, and you can begin to see how the ancient Chinese teachings oftentimes manifest itself as part of the fabric of everyday Chinese culture. So what about the opposite? What about aiming too low? So here, I would like to actually challenge everyone. Can you guys tell me what aiming too low could actually mean? So in other words, if aiming too high is having unrealistic goals, aiming too low, what could that be? Any ideas? Having too realistic goals, or it's actually beyond that. So let me share that with everyone. Having too little ambition. Excellent answer, Tim. And you are correct. When you have ambitions are not really worthy of you and your potential, you are not fulfilling that potential. You're not doing something that you ought to be doing. You are far short of what you can do. That's aiming too low. So that will be the opposite of 眼高手低. Aiming too low, having a goal that is not worthy of you. Okay, so what else? What else can we say about using archery to represent life? All the different things we want to accomplish in life. So drawing back the bow, what is that? What does that mean? Well, you've heard me talk about accumulating the energy. So same thing, that hasn't changed. When you draw back, it's like you getting ready to put your plans into action. You've made some preparations. You've studied up on the subject. So you feel like you're ready to let loose the arrow to initiate that particular project, to take action. And lastly, when you draw back the arrow, you could be pulling too much or too little. Remember, when you pull back too much and you describe this arc that overshoots your target, you know, the arrow lands somewhere behind where the target is, or you're pulling too little, too weak, so that when you let loose the arrow, it's falling somewhere between you and the target. So that's not quite what you want either, right? So how would that correspond to the context of setting goals, unrealistic goals, fulfilling potential, gathering energy, etc.? Here's what I would offer. Pulling too much, accumulating too much energy, that's an overkill. That's when you overdo stuff. That's when you are so into it that it's too much. People can't take it. Everybody's asking you to back off. But the opposite, the flip side of it, is a half-hearted effort. That is, I don't know, I'm just going to do whatever I need to do to get through another day. I'll do the minimum I need to do to pass. Well, that's a half-hearted effort, not actually hitting the target, not actually exercising your abilities. We know one thing about the Tao of humanity, is that you will feel fantastic when you are exercising your capabilities at the utmost. When you're able to use your skills, your training, your strength, your dexterity, your agility at the utmost, when you're running at full power, that is when you feel the best about yourself. And when you accomplish something as a result of operating at your optimum, that's the greatest feeling in the world. So excellent. I think we're getting the idea. So let's do a little bit more. I think we need to start wrapping up now. I need to save some time for the summary for today. So let's continue on a little bit with the metaphor for life. Here, I want to specifically target a misconception about Tao, specifically about having a goal. So this chapter is making it painfully clear that Lao Tzu is talking about goals in life and how best to accomplish them. And what Lao Tzu is saying is that you want to aim not too high, not too low, just right. And the strength that you use in pulling back the bowstring, you want to make sure that it's not too much and too little, just right. So what is Lao Tzu saying? In terms of hitting your targets in life, you must use moderation. You have to watch for the balance. You have to be careful not to overdo it, and not to make it so that your efforts are undercooked. Overcooking, undercooking, they're both bad. Too much, too little, they're both bad. So it's all about that. That's what this chapter is all about. Now, let me say that people like Bill and his students, or Sifu Ed and his students, when they look at this, even though they come from a Western background, they'll look at this chapter and it'll click immediately. They'll say, oh yeah, of course. This makes perfect sense. This is what we experience all the time when we study a martial discipline, from any teacher. And this is because as they study that particular martial discipline, they have a lot of goals and milestones. They want to learn a particular technique. They want to do a certain amount of exercise every day. At some point, they will be promoted in rank. So these are all representations of targets for them, or goals and milestones. So Westerners who study the Tao through martial arts, they will look at this and readily accept it, and they will get it. They will see how true this is to what they have experienced. To them, it's a natural part of life. There is another group of Westerners who are not as fortunate. And those are some that study the Tao only through philosophy and sometimes get trapped in philosophy. They may never figure out this chapter is all about goals. Partly, it's because the translation they're using is lacking. Partly, it's because they have a hang-up about having goals in general. Now, why am I specifically singling out Westerners for criticism? What sounds like criticism? Well, that's because in Asia, in the East, this is usually, 9 times out of 10, this is not a problem. Everybody knows that the Tao is all about having goals in life, sensible goals that are not an overreach, and goals that are worthy of you, and then accomplish them, bring you joy, happiness, and a sense of accomplishment in your life, a sense of meaning, sense of purpose. Everybody knows that, 9 times out of 10. Everybody knows that. But in the West, sometimes people get trapped in philosophy, and therefore they have a negative feeling about having goals. What are the hang-ups? Example. Philosophically oriented students of the Tao may question, why do we need goals at all? I don't need goals. I'm happier without goals. Goals are just so constraining. They bring me so much stress and tension. I don't like them. I want to live my life without them. And then they'll ask, well, this whole idea, this whole concept of goals, I mean, everything in life is just an illusion, right? So having a goal, that's illusory too, isn't it? So one characteristic or symptom of being trapped in philosophy is that you end up with a lot of, frankly, useless statements. Goals are illusory, therefore I don't need to have goals. Okay, that's really wrong, but we probably don't have enough time today to decipher and decrypt just how wrong that is. Additional questions? Well, isn't it just an artificial construct that enslaves us? I don't want to be enslaved by goals. I want to live free. I want to go with the flow. I want to let whatever goals or destination arise naturally so that wherever I end up, that's where I'm supposed to be. That's where I am meant to be. Whatever goals spontaneously manifest in my life, that is the goal for me. So to that, I'm going to quote a success coach that I enjoy and listen to, someone who's a Westerner, but understands the idea, the importance of goals. And he likes to talk about how, are you a wandering generality or a meaningful specific? So what he does is that he teaches everyone to be a meaningful specific. He says, You know, you can wander around all you like, but I've never seen anyone wandering around and then suddenly find themselves on the top of Mount Everest by wandering around. You know, whoa, where am I? Oh, I have reached the peak. What happened? How did I get here? Well, I guess this is my goal. That never happens. So reaching the peak is something that requires planning, that requires the drawing back of the bow, the accumulation of energy, and then the execution of that plan. So with that, I am now ready to jump to the summary for today, and we're almost out of time. Well, let's start with number 2. The archery metaphor means moderation, and number 1, the archery metaphor highlights goals. So you've heard me just talk about that. This is all about setting goals, sensible goals, and it's talk about executing on those goals in a spirit of moderation. So what about goals? We all have certain targets in life. Your targets may be different from my targets. So remember, having targets by itself is neither good or bad. If you have targets that are not realistic, that could be bad. If you have targets that are not visible to you and there's no way for you to hit those targets, that could be bad. But having targets by itself is not a good or bad thing. It all depends on how you set up the targets for yourself. So being a skillful archer means hitting the targets you want, and those targets could be material, but it could also be spiritual. It could be happiness, it could be peace of mind. So how do we set up those targets appropriately, and how do we accomplish them? Well, it's all about moderation. Not too high, not too low, and that means you want to set up realistic, achievable goals that would nevertheless be significant accomplishments for you. So something that is worthwhile, something that is worth your time to devote your energy, your effort into it, something that makes you feel great when you actually accomplish it, but something that you can accomplish. Not too strong, not too weak, yep, the right amount of effort. If you overdo something, it could just lead to the detriment. You could overstrain yourself. You could exhaust yourself. On the other hand, if you set up a goal that requires next to no effort, well, I would say that's probably not you exercising your full ability. So I would urge you to rethink that plan. So goals and moderation, these are the food for thoughts that I hope will serve you in the week to come. Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual. 起立，面向佛堂，持架3鞠躬，1鞠躬，再鞠躬，3鞠躬，持架各位点传是1鞠躬，接班1鞠躬。We are done, everybody. Thank you so much.